So the goal today is to reflect on 2024 in decentralized identity and verifiable credentials, and then speculate wildly about what the coming year might bring. And to that end, in addition to Helen representing the marketing side of Indicio, we have James Schulte, who's representing the business side of Indicio, and Mike Ebert, who representing the engineering side of Indicio. So we have a if not a we have a 360-ish take on all things decentralized identity in 2024. And there's no more predictable but essential question than what was your highlight of 2024? And I'm going to start with James.
All right, great question. For me in 2024, it was amazing to see the level of adoption that verifiable credentials are taking in the market. Being in the space since 2017, 2018, I guess what you could call the early days, even though there were earlier days, it's amazing to see how many participants there are, how many vendors, how many governments, how many enterprises are looking into it and starting to actually deploy. Obviously a large driver right now we're seeing over in the European Union with the digital identity wallet initiative. So we're seeing a lot of buy-in from governments and large organizations that are no longer just tinkering around on paper and spreadsheets and PowerPoints, but actually getting pilots into the market and starting to issue live credentials. Same with our customers as well. As more of our customers begin to roll into production and have live ecosystems up and going, we're seeing that business value go from conceptual to actual tangible value. So that's been something really exciting in 2024. And we're seeing that ramp up going into 2025 next year. There's been a couple announcements I'll talk about a little bit later, but more governments beginning to move from legislative to actual bills being passed that are supporting of these types of digital identity initiatives. So I'd say that was something
Yeah.
exciting.
How just to follow up on that, how much do you think the European Union's sort of embrace of decentralized identity is sort of, winding up cranking up the motor on this adoption?
Mhm. I think it's having a significant impact. I think in the same way that GDPR spurred a
Mm.
lot of other countries on to have their privacy or data privacy acts um, created. I think it's a similar case here. I think also because the European Union has a collaboration between member states, they're showing it's possible to have a wide ecosystem of players collaborate to push something along like this. We're also seeing outside of the EU bills and acts getting passed that vaguely resemble what the EU has done. So I think it's having a significant influence on that as well. I think
And
also,
and
yeah, the
yeah.
investments into the large scale pilots that the EU is doing has garnered the attention of a lot of other players around the world.
I may be speculating, but it also seems that one aspect of this is, especially from the government angle, is that this is simultaneously very lightweight infrastructure that yet can do an awful lot. And of
Mhm.
course, everybody is now terrified of vast IT project. It's a cliche of IT that, you embark on a project and it's the equivalent of, some may remember the Boston Big Dig. It's a money pit. Whereas the comparative, this is super inexpensive, relative to most other digital identity solutions. It's incredibly flexible. You can use it in multiple different ways, and it leaves a lot of space to evolve because a lot of it, not most of it, is based around open source technology. So this is a sort of, I mean, maybe there's a a kind of meta story going on here, which is the recognition that open source is the way to go forward in what we might call digital public infrastructure, which is called digital public infrastructure. Do you see that? Does anybody else want to jump in on that comment?
I think it certainly provides at least a common foundation, right? at some level, you're going to have to customize what you're doing. At some level, companies will create things that are proprietary for a particular use case or something. But if you have, a common understanding, as far as the technology and what some of the policies that would be involved in setting up this infrastructure, if you have that common foundation for those things, then you can start to string things together in interesting ways where you get the emergent properties of the ecosystem and not just the direct ones.
Mm,
And just like with GDPR, Europe is doing something first. And there are just like GDPR is good but not perfect, and there are
mm,
things that we've learned about privacy law and policy from that. And I think it'll be the same with them taking the first, kind of global level stab at digital identity legislation, where a lot of it will be good and some of it we might learn from, where there are things that turn out to be awkward or clumsy or not perfect.
mm. Well, it's also, I mean, Europe isn't the EU is not the only sort of innovator in this area. Actually, one might say that India is ahead of Europe in embracing sort of digital public infrastructure and thinking through what it might mean for, hundreds of thousands of, small and medium businesses to be able to have a trust network in which they can share data, authenticate each other, what that means for economic development. And similarly, I think we may be seeing a lot of countries, in the developing South that are looking at this technology to sort of leap ahead, in many ways, leap ahead of countries like the US and many European states. Am I exaggerating? Does anybody have any
No,
thoughts on that?
that's absolutely accurate. Argentina, thinking of, I think it was last year, city of Buenos Aires announced that they were supporting a self-sovereign identity type model of digital ID application for citizens that live in the capital, and it's become quite popular. You'd also mentioned India being a major catalyst for digital innovation for identity. Absolutely, the Aadhaar case is one that will be studied for a long time. How the world's largest nation was able to get the digital infrastructure set up to enable digital identity for 1.2, 1.3 billion citizens.
Mm,
That really is an amazing feat. And as they continue with new iterations of that system, and as they go in the direction of additional privacy preserving capabilities in the Aadhaar system, I think we're going to see more innovation, more economic opportunity that can unlock. So that's an exciting thing that that we know the Aadhaar team is looking at in terms of verifiable credentials and yeah, other types of credential formats and capabilities enabled by the verifiable credential data model. So imagine that for a country of that size and what that could unlock.
mm,
Um, so
mhm,
And even just last week, the Linux Foundation announced the launch of LF India to expand global open source support and innovation in India. And this definitely is seen from our Indicio's team that is in India. Just the amount of conversations that different organizations are having in relation to this technology. I mean, the definitely the writings on the wall for adoption there. I just think that if tying together what you mentioned earlier, Trevor, about open source, I mean, the fact that the Linux Foundation went from the Hyperledger, which was the sort of ledger blockchain kind of nexus for all of the technologies and projects at Linux Foundation, to now decentralized trust, and now is a larger umbrella project at the LF for a lot of this work. I mean, it just goes to show that when you start bringing in, I think TOIP now is a part of LF Decentralized Trust. So now you're having different organizations kind of come together and realize that it is this sort of cohesive ecosystem that Indicio has been talking about, for, since we've
And
started.
it's
Putting it all together with the governance, with the technology, and that now expanding it. It's definitely writings on the wall.
And that's an interesting, it's an interesting term. We've seen having been in this space now for some of us for certainly like 7 years, 7 or 8 years. we've seen the language evolve as this technology is being used. So I think it's the fact that what we now Linux is now calling this decentralized trust is a really interesting development. We've had self-sovereign identity, but decentralized trust. What does decentralized trust mean for the panel? Who wants to answer that question?
I think that the change in terminology is useful because when you started with self-sovereign identity, the language of that term is focused entirely on the individual, and the organizations and the corporations and the partnerships, et cetera, all looked at it and said, well, what's in it for me? We don't get anything from someone being able to control everything. But if you go with decentralized trust, then organizations and companies and governments start to see that, oh, there are benefits for us in this model where we can reduce our liability or lower our costs or improve the experience that we provide, improve the services. We can integrate more easily. We don't have to go through quite so much pain in some cases. And then you start to see the benefits for everybody. And it's interesting that the attitudes would shift on such a subtle change in language because the core ideas in the technology are the same, that you have encryption that is finally available to the masses. People hold their own data. You have these credentials and protocols that are involved. None of that changed, but the shift in language made it so that people, more people could see what it meant for them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
To add to that as well on the technical side, I think it also insinuates the removal of middlemen or third parties that would act almost as intermediaries or brokers of digital identity in a given ecosystem. Just my conversations with governments, for example, or entities that are affiliated with governments, when they hear self-sovereign identity, they get a little bit nervous because, government doesn't want to, how do you put this, to give up that centralized role that the government plays in society, right? But once they understand, okay, decentralized in the sense that the government can still be a centralized provider, but on a technological level, having it decentralized makes it easier to get their ecosystem set up and be the central issuer of credentials, but open it up such that it's easy to onboard organizations as relying parties and as verifiers of that centrally issued digital identity. So there's a lot of efficiency that comes from a decentralized model, even within a centralized ecosystem, if that makes sense. So there's a little bit of nuance in that term, centralized and decentralized. Then there are those truly decentralized ecosystems where there's not necessarily a centralized authority, but maybe authorities that issue credentials that can be verified by participants. So there's kind of a scale of maybe a spectrum of decentralized to truly self-sovereign to something in between. And the way that we're seeing the market going is kind of a mix of all of the above, which is particularly exciting. So you have the benefits of the privacy preservation with the efficiency of decentralized.
Right. The trust propagates, not necessarily the authority.
Exactly. That's a fantastic way to put it.
Yeah.
What Mike said, I meant to say that.
I had some time to think about how to summarize it for you.
I mean, actually, I think that's a really super interesting, sort of, if you think about digital interaction as a series of sort of networks, what we're doing is in a sense allowing the network to be anywhere. That you're not dependent on other third parties or intermediaries to create what one of our team members calls digital trusted relationships. And I think that's very exciting. I think that's got I think, well, I'll say more about that when it comes to thinking about next year. But seeing as you're on my screen, Mike, what was the highlight of 2024 for you?
So I get to work with the engineering team, and so typically our highlights are when we get something new to work. And one of our big projects this year is, sometimes Indicio gets painted as DIDComm and Anoncred's Hyperledger only Indy only. And this year we got to do a project that shows that we are following our mandate to be technology agnostic. We got to build, in a collaboration with CETA and Aruba, we got to do a project where we continued to use DIDComm and anon-creds in a solution that we had working, but we also added on an integration where some of the partners were using OID4VC as the communications protocol and issuing SD-JOT credentials. So in partnership with Delta, we were able to issue some IATA 1ID credentials that that we used their schema and issued it in an SD-JOT format. And we used all of those technologies on one technology solution, one platform, and thereby showing that you can make them work together, and bolstering the claim that we're trying to support whatever's viable and useful out in the ecosystems that are out there, and not just be pigeonholed.
Yeah. So I mean, it's in a sense. And it was, I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it was always going to go in this direction, but it's as if, we're supporting, VHS and Betamax, and you can use both, and you don't have to choose two different machines. You've got them all. You can have vinyl, you can have CDs and Blu-ray, you can have any particular format you want, and you can make them all work together easily in a single workflow. Would that be the correct characterization here?
Yeah, that's fair. It's like building a VCR that's got a slot for a tape and a DVD player, and then upgrading the DVD player to be able to support Blu-ray. And the formats march on, but the mission of, in that case, sharing video and audio, and in this case, sharing trustworthy data, that mission moves forward, and you just have to, there'll be new credential formats and new encryption, protocols and things like that will come out. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, and so sometimes it makes sense to choose one over the other for a particular application. If you have a platform that's flexible enough to accommodate, the choice that you need to make based on the strengths and weaknesses of the protocols and the formats, if you can choose as you go and support what you need for each particular application, and you're flexible, then you'll be able to roll with the punches. You'll be able to update. You'll have what you need when you need to have it. And that's been our approach, is to help our customers and the open source software that we contribute to be able to adjust to those things as they come, as they roll out and come forth, and but be able to make really important and useful things happen today and be prepared for the future.
I mean, yes. I mean, I think there's some, fear that, especially with, huge infrastructure projects and standards projects like that are taking place in the EU, that is that they'll choose a particular implementation that shuts off really valuable business applications. But we've got your team found a way around that, right? You can wrap credentials around other credentials. Do you want to, I mean, that seems a pretty exciting, way to deal with the multiverse of different data sharing requirements that is inevitable. There's never going to be one channel and one protocol.
Yeah, you can wrap other credentials in your chosen format. That's a good way to work with, for example, passport data. They have a format provided by ICAO that most of the countries in the world follow for their passports, and you can wrap that up in a verifiable credential format that you like. The other thing you can do is you can have parties that say, I will ingest the format provided by one government or organization. I will validate and verify this data, and then I will issue it in another format. And as long as people trust that I did a good job in validating that data, then they can trust my credential and use it in this other format that they like. And so, as credential formats roll forward, like the EU case is a perfect example. Right now, their legislation and specifications talk about the use of the technology within European borders for European citizens. They have not yet fully described how they want foreign citizens within their borders to interact with the system. They've not yet described how European citizens and their data will interact with systems outside of European borders. So as they start to look at how to cross the borders and utilize the technology around the world, or have people from around the world come and be within Europe, they're going to bump into situations where, for example, India is their technology stacks are, a lot of them are focused on DIDComm and non-creds. And so as people from India come to Europe, or people from Europe go to India, they're going to have to figure out, well, how do we make these stacks work together? Because Europe can't mandate that India switch their whole stack, and India can't mandate that Europe will switch. And so you have to have systems and platforms that will speak both, be able to translate, issue duplicate credentials if necessary, things like that. Those are concerns that will come up just because of the uneven distribution and application of the technologies.
Mm. Okay, unless anybody wants to follow up on what Mike wants to say. Yeah.
So can I just say that, so it's Tony Chapman from Collins Aerospace, that there's a Horizon, EU-funded Horizon call that we expect in January, maybe early February of next year, to do just that. I think the EU have woken up to the fact that it's okay intra-Europe, but crossing borders in both directions isn't supported. The only challenge with that is, the call is in January, submittals in September, award in early 26, and it's a 3-year project. My feeling is that industry will overtake what the EU are trying to do. You come to 29, I'm sure this nut is going to be cracked anyway. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
I'm really glad to see that they've recognized the situation. I think that industry will solve a lot of the technology problems, and I'm glad that Europe is moving, because there are going to be legislation that has to take place to support things at the government and legal level, right? Where so I'm glad that they're moving, and it might take them a bit, but then if the technology partners are ready with the technology that supports things before the legislation's there, then once the legislation's in place, everything should be pretty smooth. So I appreciate that update, because there's so much going on, I can't keep my fingers in everything. So it's good to hear that they've got some things in motion to take care of the problem, or to address the situation.
Yeah, at least they've woken up to there is a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting point. I mean, we've seen that in other areas of software providers, where they push solutions that get such mass adoption that it influences the legislation in the other direction. So there is kind of that relationship of who gets there first, who has more influence. Ultimately, we do see that government does end up winning in a lot of areas, where if they want something done a certain way, then the others just have to comply. So that's just a reality. But I do think that industry can and will move quicker. I think this next year we'll see private vendors coming out with solutions to tackle a lot of those challenges, and then we'll likely see some modifications of those solutions to catch up with the legislations that come later, and the modifications of the legislation. So in our standpoint, when we work with our customers, is how can we future-proof what we provide you? So again, providing support for a wide range of credential types, but also doing it in such a way that's modular, that you can add and update as things change, is something that's really important. So you're not stuck with an antiquated system when the time comes for something new. But yeah, the EU Horizons project is something really, really interesting on that front.
Well, and that's, I think, also where that layering approach and that future-proofing approach is also where we're going to see DIDComm come into play more, because we're going to see people adopting technologies to kind of fit the European regulation, but then see that the market really has a value to bring in, in the products themselves, bring in DIDComm connections layered alongside of OpenID connections, to then be able to have that reusable channel communication, trusted communication channel. So I think there will be examples, exactly what James just said, where you'll have the letter of the law, solutions that meet that, and then also layered and kind of evolved to then meet some of the market requirements that this technology is really supposed to support and solve for.
I think once you get past and see how effective seamless authentication is with DIDComm, and then you realize you can do so many more things with it. I think that's a level, that's like unlocking a new level of game excitement and features and benefits, and that's going to, I think, be really, really interesting. But you know, clearly we're still in the early stage implementation of the kind of let's get the basics out there. But it's really, having the flexibility to sort of really throttle up and do lots of really, really interesting things is super important. But enough of me. Helen, what was your highlight of 2024, or
Well,
more than one?
exactly. I think I have more than one, but yeah, that's exactly kind of what I was going to talk about is in 2024, seeing the use cases really evolve and mature, and see the implementations come out of, using verifiable credentials for a lot of different stuff. I think, we most often talk about our work in travel because we've been in this space for many years, working with verifiable credentials, where you touch governments, you touch private companies, you touch the traveler, and actually see them physically move from one jurisdiction to another and be able to take that information and send it in advance, be pre-cleared, all that good stuff. So definitely one of my highlights of 2024 is going through the travel process again using verifiable credentials to fly.
And you actually saw you saw that key trial with IATA 1ID and the DTC. It's kind of, I mean, it's exciting to see it in action.
Yeah. I mean, this was, just in this past fall, being able to create a digital representation of my passport on my phone, which not having to shuffle around for somebody who, has maybe travel anxiety or whatever, like not having to shuffle on my phone, not having to find paper of the ticket and the passport and everything else, then go up to talk to the law enforcement official and what are you doing here and what, and again, it takes no time once you get up there, but the line, standing in line, waiting for every single person in front of me who might have issues or might have problems or whatever, have to talk. Anyways, just circumventing all that was amazing. So more to come, definitely, with our travel use case that will definitely expand and grow over the new year. And that's not to already be talking about the future, which we'll talk about in a second, but that was definitely part of it. The other use case that I was really excited to see mature this year is with open badges. Open badges is not something that I personally was super familiar with, I think, until we started getting so many organizations coming to us saying we want open badges. And now we're seeing them adopted all over the place. We'll talk more about our customer that we have in Japan, who's seeing a huge amount of success in issuing verifiable credentials with the open badge standpoint from One EdTech. If you're not familiar, look it up. It's very interesting being able to share your accomplishments that people could literally click on and verify, right off LinkedIn. Very, very cool stuff. We had another organization, USA Kansas, who's going to be issuing verifiable credentials for the educators that they represent as part of their organization. So that's very exciting. So definitely travel and open badges were the two big this year until about 24 hours ago. And then I have my very exciting, I think, accomplishment for 2024 is Indicio being recognized and winning the 2024 Global Tech Award for Data Technology. And this is breaking news. We just found out about it this, again, less than 24 hours ago. We posted about it on our website, and we'll put it out in our newsletter. Sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. And that's I think the thing that is just icing on the cake, cherry on top of the sundae for 2024 for Indicio, having been recognized by a panel of judges that were kind of spanned Oracle, Google, Amazon. Some of these big enterprises sat on the judging committee and reviewed applications, and this was not one of those kind of, I think people look at sometimes at awards as these kind of pay for play, and it wasn't. And so I'm really excited that we were recognized for the actual work that we do, and it's a huge testament to our team. So I think
Yay us.
yes, I'll be taking 2024. I'll be ending on a high note for sure.
Excellent. Okay, so we've sort of done 2024, and the clock is ticking, not only on this meetup, but towards 2025. So I will go back to you, James Schulte. What do you think, take the crystal ball out, be heedless of the folly of prediction, and give us some thoughts as to what we might see in 2025.
Yeah, so as Helen kind of hinted at, we're really excited about our one of our newest products, Proven Auth, which is an awesome iteration of Proven, our off-the-shelf solution to issue and verify credentials. An awesome iteration of it to integrate into single sign-on systems and into some of the classic authentication systems through some of the existing protocols like SAML and OAuth, for example. So it makes it really easy for enterprises, for governments, any organization that already has systems that use those protocols to essentially bootstrap and get started with credentials as a way of accessing systems they already have in place. So in 2025, I mean, we already have a good pipeline of customers that are on the table to start using that. So we're excited for those implementations and looking forward to announcing those use cases. Another thing I'm excited about. So you had mentioned as well, or earlier we talked about globally initiatives that we're seeing pushing in the direction of using verifiable credentials for adoption. Just in the past couple of weeks, there's been a couple countries that have announced their initiatives or passed legislation in this direction. New Zealand, for example, with the Digital Identity Services Trust Framework, which is their trust framework outlining the parameters for digital trust with citizen-focused digital services. And it has support for W3C verifiable credentials. So would be that's awesome. That's always a great sign. And then Switzerland, for example, in the past couple of weeks announced their EID initiative, which is a state-recognized electronic credentialing ecosystem. Also, key part of that is verifiable credentials. So that was exciting. Another one that was recently, Tony Blair, Sir Tony Blair, I should say, just did a fantastic opinion piece in England calling for digital ID, how it would save over $2.5 billion a year for the government. So we're seeing growing interest in that area in England as well, which has been one of the countries that's kind of been on the sideline for a little bit, a little nervous to touch what some might refer to as the third rail of digital ID for government. But to see that move in this direction is, I think, one of those major green flags for the industry. So I think overall, with these new products rolling out, with more and more government enterprise interest, I think it's going to make for a really exciting year.
And I think that it's really critical for governments who are embarking on digital identity to really take into recognition that people are concerned about how their data is going to be used. And this is why, decentralized identity and verifiable credentials is the kind of technology that creates trust among users that they control their data. So I think that messaging is going to be really critical because it's very easy to think that this is, and I think one of the reasons the UK has been so cautious is that they're afraid they're just going to open a can of worms and with a technology that implies a surveillance, a deepening of a surveillance society. And the reality that we see is that governments and businesses and global enterprises want to use this technology to avoid that. So there's a really interesting change in the perception of trust in digital interaction. The days when the internet was nobody cares about privacy, just give us your data, we'll give you some fun stuff. Those are really over. I mean, that's like a different period in a sort of historical period, where people, sort of walked very, didn't have motor cars. So I think that's a critical point of messaging. But Mike, what do you see happening in 2025?
So being on the implementation side, we have a roadmap, and so when I get to make predictions, I'm basically citing my own roadmap for what I want to accomplish for the year. Um, there are a couple key technologies that are going to roll out. One is there are a lot of different DID methods, right? Ways for keeping track of the identifiers for the software and the individuals. And there's so many that it's hard to keep track of them all. But there's one in particular that seems to be exciting most of the parties in decentralized identity, where there've been so there's did solve and did indie, which focus on using a ledger for keeping track of all these DIDs. And there are benefits to using a ledger, such as availability, uptime, immutability. But then there's the difficulty, right? And there's the fact that you have to have a ledger run by somebody, or some organization or a consortium or something. Did web has been a popular did method because it's a lot easier to get up and going. And you don't need to have, you can have, list a did with just a single party attesting to that fact or whatever. It's simple. Did web with verified history is an update to did web that is going to layer on some of the benefits of having a ledger, but maintain the ease of use of did web. And the folks on the ledger side are excited by this because they get to transfer some of the benefits that are important to them about ledgers to another did format. And the folks on did web are excited because they're going to gain some of the benefits of a ledger without necessarily being tied to a blockchain in that particular type of network. So there's excitement on both sides of the fence there. And I think that one is going to be a really, really important new did method that gets a lot of support from all over the place. Mm. The other thing that's going to happen is there have been conversations about how to manage governance of these ecosystems. And as the ecosystems start to be actually implemented and deployed in the real world, and as they start to bump into each other, the questions around how do you trust particular agents? How do you know what workflows are supposed to be supported, et cetera? Those questions start to be, rather than theoretical, there are practical issues day to day where you have ecosystems that touch. And so the efforts around different forms of machine readable governance. So DGov is kind of our label for decentralized ecosystem governance. Our work with the DIF on credential trust establishment, trust over IPs, trust registry work, those kind of, and all of those different labels and specifications, those groups and parties have been interacting with each other about how to make sure that this is interoperable and, or at least that you can translate from one to the other so that you can govern an ecosystem, you can provide trust information, trust data in a way that everybody can ingest it. That's going to start to see a need in the real world implementations. And you're going to start having people who have to implement it so that they understand, aside from just hard coding the DIDs that are trustworthy, is there a file or a format or a place or an API that I can go to look to say, when interacting with this ecosystem, I should trust these DIDs. And when I interact with that other ecosystem, here are the DIDs that have been vetted. And how do you, have that overlap occur? So that the efforts, the theoretical efforts, the sample implementations are going to start to see practical requirements, practical implementations for governance. So those are the two tech things that I see coming that are fairly certain because they're on my roadmap and they're on others' roadmaps. There are various organizations that are all pushing together to make those things happen in the first half of the year,
So more generally, and I'll throw this out to everybody, so one of the surprises of, the past year or so has been the, sort of the rapid progress in artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and as always, those on the edge cases are those, the sort of criminal activity finds the edge cases in which to use these technologies to do malicious things. So we've seen the rise of deep fakes, and a real sort of existential threat to the world's biometric infrastructure. So, the sort of biometrics were seen as a much easier way to do authentication than passwords. You're not going to forget your face. But if somebody steals the biometric of your face, well, how do you reset your biometric identity? So, and of course the key centralized weakness of storing biometric data, is also an issue. So we have this an old problem and now a new problem facing a world that has spent an awful lot of money implementing biometric authentication. And biometrics in verifiable credentials is a really simple way to solve this problem. Yes or no?
I think that there's a yes and there's a no. I think that making the data verifiable so that you can trust the source solves a lot of the difficulties around biometrics. I think having it tied to an individual so that they can present at any time, so that you don't have those centralized repositories or APIs that you have, databases that you have to call into, that solves a lot of the problems. As in most things security related, you will have an arms race perpetually forever of people who find clever ways to overcome or bypass the biometric systems and additional methods that are implemented to improve the technology so that that's difficult to do. Things like the liveness detection. At the moment, it's you can tell from a video whether it's a natural human or not, and the AI generated deep fakes, aren't keeping up with it. They're not fast enough to say, like, if your system randomly says turn your head this way and then this way and then that way, your deep fake video can't generate that output quickly enough to respond in real time so you can detect whether someone's a real person or not. At some point, it will get to the point where it can respond, and then you'll need an additional method of biometric authentication to make sure that it really is a person. So there's an arms race involved, and that's the no. But the decentralizing of the data and the cryptographic verification, that's a yes. That's definitely going to be a straightforward way to deal with a lot of the problem.
Helen, your crystal ball ideas for or thoughts for 2025?
Well, I have my in the near term, I think is pretty clear. The conversation about travel and hospitality is just going to get more kind of relevant for a lot of different organizations who are looking to adopt. Notably, Heather Dahl, our CEO, is going to be sitting on a panel at CES on January 9th. On that panel as well is a professor from NYU, as well as somebody from Hyatt Hotels, talking about verifiable credentials, talking about digital travel, talking about seamless experiences, doing it in a safe, secure way. And the pre-authorization of travelers has always been that sort of missing component of that missing kind of goal that so many organizations have been trying to sort of attain. There are huge financial ramifications for putting somebody on an airplane who is not able to actually cross an international border. There are issues with service, with just accessibility, all kinds of stuff. So I definitely, I think this is the kind of cop-out answer around here, but it's travel. Like, travel is just gonna get more important, more kind of take more of the conversation around here. But with that said, I think that based on the last week, we had we hosted as part of our kind of open source contributions, hosted the diffs DIDCOM Interopathon, and that was interesting too, because I think we're also gonna see DIDCOM have more of the conversation when it comes to building these systems. I said it earlier, but I said it again, this DIDCOM is where this technology actually solves business issues with who is your customer. If we're talking about AI and deep fakes, do we actually know that they're sending out, if you're an organization, you're looking at metrics of effectiveness of connecting email open rates or whatever. DIDCOM is something that can actually be used to get actual data, verified data, and information to customers. So I think we're going to see more coming about DIDCOM, and it was something that just wasn't included in the European regulations, but I think it's where the market's going to go. And then also, I think we're just going to see more announcements for adoption. We know we know that there are people building and getting very close to full deployments. And so again, this is me kind of cheating a little bit, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have a couple new announcements in Q1 that are going to be very exciting across industries.
Speaking about deployment, so we know, I think it's really important. The sort of airline, airport, transport sector has really, really taken the lead on this technology, which is great because they've solved one of the key, most difficult challenges, which is getting somebody across a border. And they have really pressing sort of capacity issues. They're looking at a doubling of global air passenger travel from 4 billion to 8 billion in the next, 15 years. You can't build bigger and bigger airports to manage those kind of flows. So we can see that I think the work that's been done in travel is really trickling down to other, informing other use cases. But now, well, speaking of those potential other use cases, if I'm a small business, or if I'm a global enterprise, or if I'm a civic organization, what should I do? How should I get started? What's the immediate benefit I can get from implementing verifiable credential technology, and how do I do that?
Well, I'll toss it to James here in a minute, but what we are seeing from customers is who are, maybe they're not the most giant enterprise with, the biggest tech team with the biggest development resources and engineering resources to adopt new technology. But what they do have are specific business real problems. They have issues with being able to having to take time to onboard new employees to 10 different systems. They are having to take time out of their days and workflows to reset passwords and use authenticator apps and update hardware and what's going to happen and da, 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 da. And so, we're seeing these more kind of this SMB type buyer come out and say, we're having these specific problems, and they might have an identity provider. They might use a large organization, paying an Okta, et cetera, for, identity, one portion of their identity needs. But at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road and they want to, be able to pick up their phones and, log into their, Microsoft Teams account, that's what we're seeing them, come to Indicio with that. And I'm sure James has had more conversations because he's definitely on the front lines, but I'll toss it to James.
I absolutely agree, Helen. Every business has a pain point of some sort, and how painful is that point, and what do they need to solve it is essentially the gist of the conversation that we have with new and potential customers. I'll tell you about one that we've recently been having. This organization has a issue with fraud, and they have essentially estimated an exact number, a dollar amount for each time a fraud occurrence happens. It costs them $1,500 to $1,700 per instance of fraud. And so for them, it's very painful and it's very concrete. At the end of the year, this is how much money we lost. This is how much it cost us simply not solving this problem. And with a price tag like that, it doesn't need to be tens of thousands of instances before it really hurts. It could be dozens or hundreds, right? So, and then to follow up with your question, Trevor, what can people do to get started to solve problems like that? Well, in a verifiable credential ecosystem, you could start simply with a closed ecosystem, very small, where you would just need one issuer agent to issue a credential with, a schema defined by you. That could be, the question of what information do you need in that credential to identify the person that you're dealing with. You typically need a digital wallet of some sort to hold that type of credential that can be integrated into an existing application through our SDK. And then you would need some way to verify those credentials. So a verifier agent. Um, in our case, we provide simple software that doubles as the issuance and verification of those credentials. So it's easy to get that integrated into your existing ID management system and flip a switch and start issuing and verifying those credentials. So it does, like Helen said, it doesn't need to be a massive use case where you have tens of millions of users. It could be, I have a dozen employees and I need to make sure that they're the right person getting into the computer at their workspace. A use case as simple as that could end up saving hundreds of thousands down the line if something were to happen. Um, so yeah, size, there's not a use case that's too small or too big for this type of technology.
We have five. I don't know, Mike, if you have anything you want to throw in there. We have 5 minutes left. If anybody else wants to ask a question of the panel, feel free to do so now before the clock ticks out. Otherwise, I'll pause.
I'm happy to wait for a question from the audience. I don't need to fill the space. I will say to go along with Helen and James talking about how the small and medium business, the ease of implementation, starting small, that's one of the key focuses for me this year. Is we've learned enough from working on various use cases, pilots, projects, et cetera, that we can see some ways to improve the user experience of using the software and also the developer or implementer's experience of getting it set up. So we have my team is going to be focusing on some ways to try and make it easier to get going and easier to use from day to day so that you lower the barrier to entry even further. And I do see we've got a question here.
Yes.
Do you work with civic.com and their Civic Pass? I personally am not familiar with civic.com, so let me go look.
Yeah, I'm not familiar as well.
I think one thing we could bring up though is that Indicio is like James said earlier, is able to work alongside a lot of different platforms and technologies, and that's kind of the benefit of what we do here. So if somebody has already connected themselves to another platform. I'm not sure, how decentralized Civic is. If they want to add decentralized identity verifiable credentials, just ping Okta and the rest of them. That's where, Indicio has really been able to shine in the past. But anyway, Michael, did you have any other follow-up questions on this?
No, I'm just really curious, about, I'm not a tech person, so I try to learn everything I can, but how, what is the strategy within the technology to verify, someone's identity? And what we're looking at with our startup, Citizen.win is, can you have like 15 or 20 or 25 different ways to verify, including, maybe you've been on LinkedIn for 10 years, is that like part of, that might help identify a person, or, 5 different government documents, and maybe a Swiss passport. I happen to have a Swiss passport. So multiple ways to verify identity. Is that something that you look at Indicio as far as, verifying someone's identity? How deep can you go, and how does that kind of work?
Like you said, there are a lot of ways that you can verify someone's identity, or that you can layer on additional trust. And the technology is moving in the direction of making using more of those more straightforward. So, like the obvious place to start is government ID. But if you can have some kind of credential or verification, if you can prove you've been on LinkedIn for 10 years, if you have 5 other trustworthy people who say that you are who you say you are, if you
Right.
have if you can present present credentials that show you have a utility history of living at a particular address for a certain number of years. Uh, the clever ways to show that someone is a real human or that they behave in a manner that that you can trust without it being some centralized, Big Brother system that has all of the data about you in one central location. If you can gather the trust from a bunch of sources, then the individual's in control, and you can verify in a variety of ways suited to your current need or use case. You can select which ones you need. So, for example, if you're trying to do a loan for a mortgage, they're going to be interested in your government ID. They're going to be interested in your credit history. They're going to be interested in some kind of payment history. If you are joining a social network, then the social network may be interested in do you have people who you've already interacted with that know who you are and like you? Do you have a score from your Twitter usage that shows that you're a friendly person, that you don't flame often or something like that? The types of validations and verifications you would do would vary, and having a toolkit of different options is going to be really useful and important. So that's great that you would bring it up, that what kind of ways can we authenticate, what variety is available that is useful for different use cases. So that's awesome.
Awesome. Can I have a follow-up question? If nobody else, I don't want to take anybody
Sure,
else's.
go for it. Shoot.
Oh, thank you so much. So the one we're really excited about now is it's called uidc.org. I put it in the chat. And it's the Universal Identity Council in Washington, D.C., founded by Mariana DeHaan, who also previously had created WIN.Systems, World Identity Network. And so along the lines of what she's been trying to do for at least 7 years, I know that in 2017 she was on Necker Island with Richard Branson and all kinds of blockchain experts, and they're saying we want to build a universal ID system, and what she talks about in her new documentary movie Shadows in the Dark, which I highly recommend. It's a really great documentary that just came out that she produced, and she's in it. And so my question to you is your technology capable, like, because not only do we want to be part of an ID network, but we want to build it into a full-blown citizen social network, all about education and global solutions, and a hub for nonprofits, a hub for civil society organizations, where there's no nonsense, there's no fluff, there's no ridiculous advertisements, but it's all about people coming together to address issues, and then finding funding sources, getting nonprofits more funding that are that show merit, and that so I've been looking at creating something like this for a long time, but now that the technology and crypto and blockchain and others has evolved so much, I think now is our moment to. So that's my question. Does Indicio's technology, can we scale? Because we're looking at one called Holochain, which is hopefully coming to maturity and will launch soon, where you could scale something as big as a Twitter or a Facebook, but it's all decentralized processing, and the individuals do processing on the background of their various devices, and they earn crypto for doing processing. So the more members, the more powerful it becomes. So that's my question. How could we possibly scale a universal ID network? And in fact, if it's truly decentralized, there only really needs to be one, right? And everybody can kind of participate in it.
There are various sovereign entities that have legal rights to control how identity are managed within their borders. And having all of them agree on something is not likely to occur. If the technology that's being used and built will scale to national or international levels. So the process of issuing a credential is not super energy or compute intensive, and then that's reusable for a good long time. And then the verification happens at the edges of the network. There's no central verifier that's required. The data with the credentials, it's some applications of blockchain are good where you can store data that's intended to be public. Personal private data, especially with the coming, at some point it's possible that quantum computing will make it so that a lot of the existing encryption methods are no longer safe. And so if you have data on a public blockchain that's not behind a quantum safe encryption mechanism, suddenly that's all public. So we try not to put personal data on public ledgers, but where the individuals can hold their credentials on their devices, you don't have a centralized repository like that. And that's more computing at the edge. So you have simple issuance, you have edge verification, you have edge storage. And so that's a system that will scale to literally billions of people and tens of billions of credentials.
So,
yeah, that's
so
ahead,
unfortunately, we have to wrap up this meeting. But Michael, we'd be delighted to keep talking about these projects with you. James Schulte would be the contact person, and so make sure that James, you have Michael's email or however you wish to be contacted, and we can explore
we've
this
worked together
in
before,
detail.
so we know each other.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Awesome.
All right. Well, that's been a fascinating talk. I'm just going to throw it back to Helen for a few minutes to talk about the next meetup, which will be in 2025. There's my final prediction.
Yes. Yeah. Final prediction. We're going to have another one in 2024. Yep. No, thank you all for coming. We will have a special webinar meetup. So be on the lookout out for that on AI and verifiable credentials with Trevor and Heather. They're going to have a nice fireside chat. I think that's January 6th. So we'll be sending that information out in your email. So make sure you sign up for Indicio's newsletter list. Last Tuesday of January, we'll have a very exciting next Indicio Identity Community Meetup. So have a happy holiday season, joyous new year, and we will be seeing you all in 2025. Thanks so much.